We live in an era of chaos. Governments are deeply corrupt. Leaders trample their people with brutal indifference, and entire nations are torn apart by wars that benefit only a few. The entire world seems to be teetering on the brink of collapse, caught in a web of injustice, greed, and uncontrolled violence. Power and wealth have become weapons of oppression. Stronger nations manipulate, exploit, and destroy weaker ones under the pretext of order and progress. We see it clearly today. The great modern empires dictate the rules of the world, leaving in their wake broken economies and devastated peoples. Just look at Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan, North Korea, Venezuela, and large parts of Africa. They are nations where pain has become routine, where the population suffers from the excessive ambition of the powerful. Authoritarian governments, internal conflicts, resource exploitation, and humanitarian neglect paint a map marked by suffering. How many more empires must rise and fall? How many more innocent people must bear the weight of unjust and decadent systems? But this story has an end, and it will not be written by the powerful of this world. Centuries ago, the prophet Daniel received a vision. 4 beasts, symbols of 4 great kingdoms that would attempt to subjugate the earth. But all would fall, because judgment is already determined, and soon the eternal kingdom will be established. Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, will come to take control. He will not be elected by vote, nor will he ascend to power by force. His authority will be just, holy, and final. Everything that corrupts, oppresses, and destroys today will be undone. Because when Christ reigns, truth will shine forth, justice will prevail, and human dominion will come to an end. Let's get started. It is often said that prophecy is history written before it happens. The visions revealed to the prophet Daniel constitute compelling evidence of God's existence, as they anticipate future events with astonishing accuracy. Only God, in his infinite omniscience, knows what is to come. However, in his sovereignty, he has chosen to reveal part of that knowledge through his prophets. In the book of Daniel, the Lord unfolds his divine plan for the Gentile nations, for the people of Israel, and for the glorious establishment of his eternal kingdom. In this context, it is fascinating to examine the prophecy of the 4 beasts described in chapter 7. The accuracy of these prophetic passages has troubled skeptical critics, who have attempted to discredit the book by claiming that it was written centuries after Daniel's life. For them, it wouldn't be a prophecy of the future, but rather a story based on events that have already occurred. However, these claims aren't born from evidence, but from prejudices that seek to deny the supernatural. That said, dear listener, I invite you to delve with me into this amazing chapter from the book of Daniel. Let's begin by reading verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and explained the main points of the matter. This verse introduces a new section in the book of Daniel, the prophetic section. Up to this point, the first 6 chapters recount historical events from the prophet's life, his faithfulness to God, and how the Lord exalted him in the midst of pagan empires. But beginning in chapter 7, the focus shifts to the visions God gave him, revealing the future of the nations and the establishment of Christ's eternal kingdom. The text tells us that it was in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. For a long time, Belshazzar was considered a fictional character by critics. Many 19th century scholars claim that the Bible was mistaken in referring to him as king of Babylon, since the historical records available at that time did not mention any king with that name. According to known documents, the last monarch of the Babylonian Empire was Nabonidus, leading some to conclude that the book of Daniel was not historically reliable. However, this is a clear example of how archaeology, far from contradicting the Bible, has come to confirm its veracity. In the 19th century, the famous Nabonidus cylinder was discovered, a cuneiform inscription found in the ruins of Ur, where Nabonidus expressly mentions his son Belshazzar as part of his royal family. Furthermore, other Babylonian tablets reveal that Nabonidus was absent from Babylon for long periods, settling in the city of Tema in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar as co-regent. that is, as active ruler in his absence. This explains why Belshazzar is called king in the book of Daniel, and also why in Daniel chapter 5, verse 29, when he offers to make Daniel the third ruler of the kingdom, he does not offer him the second place. Nabonidus was still the legitimate king, the first, Belshazzar the second, and therefore the highest honor he could bestow was third place in authority. This detail clearly confirms the historical accuracy of the biblical account. This discovery has therefore forced even the most skeptical critics to reconsider their position, as it shows that the information contained in the Bible was correct. Let's continue reading verses 2 and 3. Daniel said, "I saw in my visions at night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were fighting on the great sea, and four great beasts, each different from another, were coming up out of the sea." The four winds of heaven. The word translated winds can also be interpreted as spirits. Under this reading, Daniel would have witnessed a great confrontation between angelic beings who gathered from the four cardinal points. This interpretation is not surprising from a biblical perspective, since on several occasions the scriptures show angels actively participating in the affairs of humanity. They were fighting on the Great Sea. In the Bible, the Mediterranean Sea was known as the Great Sea. Therefore, it is possible to understand that Daniel's vision is connected to the Mediterranean world's environment, which makes sense considering that the four empires mentioned in this prophecy developed around that region. However, the mention of the Great Sea can also be interpreted symbolically as a reference to the nations of the world. In that sense, what Daniel witnessed was the beginning of great international turmoil. It is interesting to note that the wind usually blows from one direction, but in this view it blows from all four cardinal points at the same time. This suggests a violence unleashed in all directions, a global upheaval affecting all nations. From this turbulent sea, Daniel saw four great beasts, distinct from one another. These beasts symbolize four kingdoms that will arise in history. Instead of using human or noble imagery, God describes these kingdoms as savage creatures, representing their brutal, irrational, and oppressive character. Although in the world they may be seen as advanced, powerful, or admirable, from God's perspective they are governments corrupted by sin, pride, and violence. Here we see a key lesson. The true face of human power separated from God is fierce, selfish, and destructive. The text also highlights that these beasts were different from one another. This teaches us that although all empires share a common fallen nature, each has unique traits. Let's continue reading verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and stood like a man on its feet, and a man's heart was given to it. Regarding the first beast, we note that it combined the strength of the lion with the swiftness of the eagle. In secular times, the lion is considered the king of land animals, while the eagle is among the birds of the sky. This powerful combination represented the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire emerged at a key moment in ancient history when the dominant power of the Near East, the Assyrian Empire, was beginning to weaken. For centuries, Assyria had ruled with an iron fist over many nations, including Babylon. However, toward the end of the 7th century before Christ, Assyrian rule began to fragment due to internal conflicts, rebellions, and military attrition. It was then that Babylon, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar's father, rose in rebellion and formed an alliance with the Medes to confront Assyria. This coalition achieved a decisive victory in 612 before Christ. With the fall of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, marking the end of the Assyrian Empire and the beginning of the New World power, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. After Nabopolassar's death, his son Nebuchadnezzar II ascended to the throne and led the empire to its greatest splendor. Under his reign, Babylon not only consolidated its position as the dominant power of the ancient world, but also experienced a remarkable cultural, military, and architectural flourishing. Nebuchadnezzar was a brilliant strategist and a passionate builder. He expanded his dominions through successful military campaigns, including the conquest of Jerusalem and the exile of the Jews, pivotal events in biblical history. He embellished the city of Babylon with majestic buildings, such as the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, according to tradition, and the famous Ishtar Gate, decorated with reliefs of lions and mythological creatures. Under his rule, Babylon became a symbol of human splendor and pride, but also of spiritual arrogance, as the biblical account in the book of Daniel shows. Now the prophet observes that their wings were plucked off. This image represents a divine judgment, a sudden humiliation, where the kingdom's pride and arrogance are shattered. Historically, this relates to what happened in Daniel chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar was humbled by God and lived like a beast until he acknowledged the sovereignty of the Almighty. The text then says that she was lifted up from the ground and stood like a man on her feet. This transformation symbolizes a radical change. He is no longer an aggressive and irrational beast, but someone who has been restored to a human condition. This scene illustrates King Nebuchadnezzar's restoration after his period of humiliation. When he recognized that heaven rules, God restored his sanity and dignity. Finally, a human heart was given to him, indicating an internal change. He would no longer rule with the pride of a beast, but with the sensitivity and understanding of a human being who recognizes his dependence on God. This part of the vision teaches us something profound. Human kingdoms, however powerful they may be, are subject to divine judgment. God does not tolerate pride, and if necessary, will humble the greatest kings to acknowledge that he is sovereign over all things. At the same time, we see the grace of God, who not only judges, but also restores those who repent and humble themselves. Nebuchadnezzar is an example of how even the most powerful can be transformed when they encounter the glory of the true God. Let's continue reading verse 5. And behold, another second beast like a bear, which was raised up on one side more than on the other, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And thus it was said to it, Arise, devour much flesh. This beast referred to the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire was born from a strategic and providential union between 2 powerful peoples of antiquity, the Medes and the Persians. Although Media was initially the dominant nation, over time, under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, Persia took the lead. Cyrus, a young Persian leader of great vision and charisma, succeeded in unifying both peoples around 550 before Christ, thus establishing a strong and cohesive empire. His rise was rapid and decisive. With diplomatic skills and brilliant military strategy, Cyrus expanded his dominions at great speed, conquering vast regions of Asia Minor, including the powerful kingdom of Lydia and later the heart of the ancient world, Babylon. The conquest of Babylon by the Medo-Persian Empire was a defining moment in world history and prophecy. According to the book of Daniel, this victory was achieved in a stunning manner and with almost no resistance. In 539 before Christ, while King Belshazzar was celebrating a banquet filled with arrogance and contempt for the God of Israel, Cyrus's troops, led by his general Gobryas, diverted the course of the Euphrates River. This allowed them to enter the city by surprise through the dry riverbed. In a single night, Babylon's power fell, fulfilling the prophecy written on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Thus, the most splendid empire up to that time was handed over to the Medes and Persians. Cyrus was not only an effective conqueror, but also a wise ruler who respected the cultures he dominated. He allowed the conquered peoples to retain their religions and customs, and in the case of the Jews, he decreed their return to Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple, which marked a crucial point in biblical history. Under Medo-Persian rule, the empire stretched from India to Egypt, becoming the largest the world had ever known. Its administrative structure and respect for the law laid the foundations for a model of government that would influence later empires. Thus, the Medo-Persian Empire not only defeated Babylon, but also inherited its place in history as a tool in God's hands to fulfill his eternal plans. Now, the prophet Daniel noted that the bear was more lifted up on one side than on the other, which fits perfectly with the historical reality of the Medo-Persian Empire. Although the Persians were initially under the rule of the Medes, everything changed with the arrival of Cyrus the Great, a Persian who assumed leadership and completely transformed the balance of power. From then on, the Persians took the lead and occupied the dominant position within the alliance, which explains why the bear stood up on one side more than the other in the prophetic vision. Another detail that Daniel highlights in his vision is that this imposing bear had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. The image conveys strength, ferocity, and a conquering nature. The 3 ribs seem to symbolize the remnants of kingdoms that had already been defeated and devoured by this beast. In this context, they are commonly interpreted as referring to Babylon to the west, Lydia to the north, and Egypt to the south, 3 great powers that were conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire during its expansion. However, this kingdom, like all the others, acted under the sovereign authority of God. Therefore, it is commanded, "Arise, devour much flesh." Following the metaphor of a predatory beast, this expression indicates that God allowed him to continue his conquests, extending his power and dominion until he became a vast and feared empire. Although he seemed invincible to human eyes, his strength and expansion were subject to the designs of the Almighty. Let's continue reading verse 6. After this I looked, and behold, another beast like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. This beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. The focus on attack is further intensified in this vision by the presence of 4 wings on the beast's back, a symbol of speed and expansion. In this case, it clearly represents the Greek monarchy at its height, under the leadership of Alexander the Great. This remarkable conqueror was known for the impressive speed and global reach of his military campaigns. Between 334 and 330 before Christ, he managed to subdue the vast Medo-Persian Empire and expanded his dominions as far as India, consolidating one of the largest and fastest-forming empires in all of ancient history. For this reason, it is compared to a leopard, one of the fastest animals on the face of the earth. Now it is important to briefly consider the history of the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, since understanding the events of that period will allow us to more clearly understand the prophecy of the book of Daniel. The Greek Empire under Alexander the Great marked one of the most impressive and rapid periods of expansion in ancient history. Alexander was the son of Philip II of Macedonia, a king who managed to unify the often warring Greek city-states through strategic alliances and conquests. Philip paved the way for a strong and organized empire and also took care to provide his son with an exceptional education, even being tutored by the philosopher Aristotle. At the age of 18, Alexander was already distinguished as a brilliant military commander, and at the age of 20, following the assassination of his father, he ascended the throne of Macedonia. He quickly consolidated his power and suppressed internal rebellions, completely unifying Greece under his authority. Once established at home, Alexander set about fulfilling his father's ambitious dream, conquering the Persian Empire. In 334 before Christ, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor and faced the Persians at the Battle of the Granicus, where he won his first major victory. Later, in 333 before Christ, he defeated the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus, despite being outnumbered. His military genius, impeccable strategy, and ability to inspire his troops allowed him to advance unchecked. The third and final victory came in 331 before Christ, at the famous Battle of Gaugamela, where Persian power was completely crushed, sealing the fall of the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander continued his conquest eastward, founding cities, spreading Greek culture, and expanding his empire to unprecedented limits. He reached as far as India, an astonishing feat for his time. However, upon reaching the Hyphasis River, his soldiers, exhausted by years of campaigning and fighting, refused to continue. Faced with the resistance of his men, Alexander was forced to turn back. During the return journey, in 323 before Christ, Alexander died suddenly in Babylon at the age of only 32. His death left an immense power vacuum, as he left no clear heir. As a result, his vast empire was divided among his 4 main generals, known as the Diadochi, who ruled different territories: Cassander in Macedonia, Lysimachus in Thrace, Seleucus in Asia, and Ptolemy in Egypt. Thus ended Alexander's reign, but his legacy lived on through the Hellenization of the ancient world, a cultural fusion that would profoundly influence history. even in the time of the New Testament. Now, returning to the story of the prophet Daniel, he notes that this beast had 4 heads. This image symbolizes the 4 generals into whom Alexander the Great's empire was divided after his death. Once again, the fact that God was acting sovereignly, guiding the course of this empire's great advances, is emphasized. Note the expression, "and dominion was given unto him." This does not imply that God approved of the crimes or cruelty of these empires, but rather that power is in God's hands, and he grants it to whomever he wishes. From that moment on, responsibility for actions falls on each individual. This truth should produce humility in the powerful of the earth, as well as a deep sense of responsibility, since in the end, God will hold them accountable for the way they exercised the power entrusted to them. Let us continue reading verses 7 and 8. "After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, having great iron teeth. It devoured and broke into pieces, and trampled the remains with its feet. And it was very different from all the beasts that I saw before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, behold, another little horn came up among them, and before it 3 of the first horns were plucked up. And behold, this horn had eyes like a man's and a mouth speaking great things." Daniel could not compare the 4th beast to any known animal. All he mentions about it is that it was fearful, terrible, and extremely strong. In the previous vision, found in Daniel chapter 2, this beast corresponds to the legs of iron and feet, composed of iron mixed with clay. This figure represents the Roman Empire. This empire was characterized by its strength and organization, but also by its cruelty and arrogance. The Roman Empire had its roots in a small town on the banks of the Tiber River, which over time became one of the most powerful and extensive civilizations in history. Rome began as a monarchy, then became a republic, and finally transformed into an empire. During the Republic, Rome grew stronger thanks to its political structures, military discipline, and expansionist ambition. One of the great generals of this period was Publius Cornelius Scipio, known as Scipio Africanus, who achieved one of Rome's most emblematic victories by defeating the formidable Carthaginian general Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, 202 before Christ, which marked the end of the Second Punic War. With this victory, Rome consolidated its dominance in the Western Mediterranean and took a decisive step toward global supremacy. Rome later undertook the conquest of the Hellenistic kingdoms, heirs to Alexander the Great's empire. Although these territories retained Greek culture and a strong Hellenistic influence, they soon fell under Roman control. Thus, Rome absorbed much of the Greek cultural legacy, a process known as Hellenization. Greek philosophy, architecture, art, and language became part of the Roman world, enriching its civilization. Rome's advance continued, and in 63 before Christ, General Pompey the Great conquered Jerusalem, incorporating the territory of Judea into Roman rule. This conquest was especially significant, as it placed the land of Israel under the yoke of a foreign power that would later play a key role in the events narrated in the New Testament. With the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 before Christ, a power struggle broke out that culminated in the victory of his adopted son, Octavian, who later adopted the title of Augustus. With him, the Roman Empire officially began in 27 before Christ. Augustus was the first emperor, and under his rule, Rome experienced a period of stability known as the Pax Romana. One of his most decisive achievements was the conquest of Egypt after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. With this victory, Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, and the last vestige of the Hellenistic kingdom that had begun with Alexander the Great came to an end. However, despite its advances in law, engineering, and culture, the Roman Empire was also synonymous with cruelty and repression. The Colosseum, one of Rome's most famous monuments, witnessed bloody spectacles where thousands of people, including slaves and prisoners, they were forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of the masses. Among the victims were many Christians, especially during the early centuries of Christianity. Christ's followers were persecuted with extreme violence. Accused of treason for not worshiping the emperor as a god, many were arrested, tortured, and brutally executed. Some were thrown to the wild beasts in the amphitheaters, others were crucified or burned alive. These persecutions, far from extinguishing the Christian faith, they strengthened the conviction of believers, and many of them became martyrs whose testimony would profoundly impact the history of humanity. Daniel continues his description by stating that this beast had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and trampled the remains with its feet, and it was very different from all the beasts that were before it. Daniel points out some additional characteristics of this beast, which he will develop in more detail in his interpretation. In first place, he noted that it had 10 horns, which he later identified as 10 kings. However, another little horn then arose, growing so large that it overthrew 3 of the previous horns. This little horn caught the prophet's attention, for it is described as having eyes like a man's and a mouth that spoke arrogantly. In fact, this human-like horn becomes the central element of this part of the vision, and Daniel will later ask for a specific explanation of its meaning. Now, the Roman Empire disintegrated and fell primarily because of its internal corruption and profound moral decay. This pattern was not unique to Rome, but it was repeated in the 4 empires depicted in Daniel's vision. They all collapsed for the same reasons. Today, we see those same signs of deterioration reflected in our modern society. Factors such as alcoholism, drug addiction, loss of values, and family breakdown have generated obvious consequences, such as gender violence, conflicts between parents and children, aggression in schools, and insecurity on the streets. Despite its fall, the Roman Empire is believed to be restored in the end times. It is interesting to note that, throughout history, various leaders and movements have attempted to revive its legacy. Historian Hoffman comments, "When the Germanic and Slavic peoples advanced partially into Roman lands, they in some way adopted the historical position of the Roman Empire. Their princes married into Roman families. Charlemagne was descended from one of them. Almost at the same time, the German Emperor Otto II and the Russian Grand Prince Vladimir married daughters of the Eastern Roman Emperor. This policy characterized the relationship of the invading nations with Rome. They did not found a new kingdom, but continued the Roman one. This process, according to various scholars of prophecy, will extend until the final consummation of Roman power, when it will manifest itself in its definitive form, divided into 10 kingdoms. Trying to precisely identify these kingdoms would be as presumptuous as setting a date for the coming of Christ, since the 2 events are closely linked. In this context, the appearance of another little horn is mentioned, which becomes the key figure in this entire prophetic scene. This horn will overthrow 3 of the 10 horns and take control over all the others. Although we still don't know for sure which 10 kingdoms these will be, it is understood that they will emerge from the reconfiguration of the ancient Roman Empire. Daniel 8 gives us a revealing detail. This horn had eyes like those of a man, which indicates cunning, intelligence, and remarkable strategic ability. Furthermore, he is said to have a mouth that spoke with great arrogance, which describes his blasphemous and proud nature. This figure represents the Antichrist, the last great world ruler who will rise in direct opposition to God and his people. Throughout chapter 7, Daniel observes that this horn makes war against the saints and prevails against them for a time. It is a period of intense persecution and rebellion where the Antichrist will seek to alter the times and the law, dominating for a limited time, described as a time, times and half a time, that is 3.5 years, which aligns with other prophetic passages about the Great Tribulation. However, the vision does not end in despair. In the midst of this scene of judgment and tyranny, Daniel sees something glorious. In verses 13 and 14 we read, "I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, and coming to the Ancient of Days. And they brought him near before him. And there was given to him dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that shall not be destroyed." This Son of Man is none other than the Lord Jesus Christ, who at his second coming will put an end to the rule of the Antichrist, destroy the power of human kingdoms, and establish his eternal kingdom. Unlike previous empires, depicted as wild, cruel, and destructive beasts, Christ's kingdom will be just, peaceful, and eternal. He will not only judge the Antichrist and the kingdoms that supported him, but he will also reign over the entire earth with justice, truth, and glory. Dear listener, we live in times where the world's governments, one after another, have decided to turn their backs on God. With laws that violate biblical principles, ideologies that distort the truth, and global agendas like the 2030 Agenda, the ground is being quietly prepared for the establishment of a new world order. Through speeches of unity, progress, and tolerance, a spiritual and political platform is being created upon which the Antichrist will rise, the final leader of human rebellion against God. Structures are aligning, nations are unifying, and the spirit of deception is already operating strongly, promoting a world without absolutes, without truth, and without Christ. Yet in the midst of this bleak outlook, those of us who wait for the Lord do not live in fear, but in hope. For the scriptures are clear, the dominion of men has a limit. Jesus will come. The Son of Man will descend with power and great glory, and with a single word he will destroy the Antichrist and his entire system of corruption and deception. He will not only put an end to human empires, but will establish an eternal kingdom, full of justice, peace, and truth, where his people will reign with him forever. This is the hope that sustains the church, not a better world built by human effort, but a perfect kingdom brought about by the King of Kings. And while the world organizes to resist God, we prepare to receive our Savior. For his coming is certain, his judgment is just, and his kingdom is eternal. And so we come to the end of this video. We sincerely hope it has been a great blessing to your life. We invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. In this way, you'll be supporting this ministry and helping more people be edified. God bless you.